As a developer, it's important to teach the player the mechanics of your game in a way that's clear enough to learn but vague enough to not feel like railroading. If you give a player too much obvious information, they feel like they're just going through the motions without any thought. But if you don't give them enough, they feel like the game is unclear and unfairly difficult. You don't want to hold the player's hand, but you do want to leave some clues around pointing them in the right direction. Usually devs will introduce each potential threat in isolation before combining them. First you learn to platform, then you learn to fight, and then you get to do both at the same time. It comes together to make an awesome challenge. But most often game design isn't this good, it's a tricky balance. Sometimes a game will hold the player's hand a bit too strongly, making the puzzle just a case of monkey see, monkey do. And sometimes the puzzle is so vague that the player feels cheated. I'm sure anyone can relate to that moment where something unexpected jumps out and hits you for big damage. You can't avoid it because you weren't aware that there was a threat to begin with. This is where games like I Wanna Be the Guy find their identity. From the first screen, the game is already playing the player. You start on the left side, so your eyes naturally travel right. Why wouldn't they? You've played platformers before, it's pretty standard. You also start at the top of the screen and you see that the exit is at the bottom, so alright, we jump down this hole and walk back to the left and wham, game over. I Wanna Be the Guy is unfairly difficult, and that's the joke. It's a mechanical comedy game. It's a parody of quarter stealers from the arcade era. Trial and error gameplay is usually a negative term for a game that's unfairly difficult, where players have to die to learn what to do. It's a type of playstyle where success is defined by already knowing what's going to happen instead of skill. It's often characterized by sucker punches and sneak attacks. It's not fair, it's cheap, it's not good game design, it's just dumb. But in I Wanna Be the Guy, that's the joke. The question is, if you aim to make bad game design and succeed, does that make it good game design? I've been seeing this ironically bad design popping up in a good number of games, and I've been calling it good bad design. It's actually pretty spectacular because not only does it actually accomplish the goal of entertaining the player, but it also functions as reverse psychology, where the player is antagonized into playing through levels that would otherwise just make them rage quit. Not only are you more engaged with the game because it's negging you, but you're also more susceptible to positive feedback later on because you're more focused and in the moment. The first room of the game has taught you to expect sucker punches. The designer built the game knowing what most players will do, and it's your job to think through your game plan twice. Once to think about how you'll get through the screen, and another time to think about what parts of the plan are yours, and what part is the level designer pushing you into a trap. Here's a room a bit later in the game. You walk in, dispatch some pretty simple baddies, and you're already looking at this spiky elevator challenge coming up. But on your way there, the game sucker punches you. This couch, which up until this point has been a background element, turns out to be a spring trap that propels you into the ceiling, killing you. Alright, that's a pretty good one, but you won't get me with that twice. After you finish the elevator challenge, there are 2 more couches underneath spikes. Since so far the game's taught you to expect sneak attacks, you're naturally going to be cautious here. You have half a screen's horizontal length left until you're in the next zone, and the only threat remaining are these ceiling spikes. Since so far the game's taught you that couches, similar to the 2 that stand before you, may be spring traps, you naturally concur that these will kill you if you touch them. Why else would they be there? Now comes the challenge of making the tricky jump of weaving between the spikes and the spring. The catch is that you can't make this jump. You're gonna kill yourself. These couches are not spring traps, they're background elements. The game understands what the player is thinking so well that it can kill the player just through sheer mind games. That's bullshit, and it should make the player angry, but instead it makes them laugh. This game is hilarious, and that humor encourages you to engage with a game that would otherwise just be a really frustrating experience. We live in a world where there's tons of art and there's tons of free art, so if you're interacting with a piece and it's asking for more of your attention than you're willing to give it, then you're likely to just drop it and move on to the next thing. But if there's fun to find in failure, then you're more likely to stick around. And that's where getting over it finds its identity. Here's another game that utilizes good bad game design as a major feature. First off, there's the obviously janky controls. Your only input is your mouse, which moves around this big awkward hammer, and that's your only tool to climb this mountain of trash. Not only is it incredibly difficult to manipulate your hammer while you're flinging yourself around, but it's also incredibly easy to send yourself tumbling downwards with one wrong move. That brings us to the second pillar of good bad design in the game. It wastes your time. Usually when you mess up in a platformer, you just respawn and try again, but this game's physics send you bouncing all the way back down the mountain. A tiny mistake can send you all the way back to the beginning. You'll have to awkwardly clamber your way back up all over again. Difference between Getting Over It and I Want to Be the Guy is the way they treat your failures. The latter blast guilty gear as your cute little avatar explodes into blood and gore. It's laughing at you, and ideally that ignites an intense gamer rage inside of you. You want to be the guy who beat this hard video game and you don't want to be laughed at, and that's why you're going to keep playing. It's reverse psychology. But Getting Over It should get some props because it manages to play on the next level after that. When you fail in that game, the game suddenly boots up a recording of the devs sympathizing with your frustration and encouraging you to keep playing despite the setback. It's reverse psychology. The game knows that you'll be frustrated, and it knows that the greatest salt it could sprinkle in your wound is chill music and tender words of not apology, but justification of why you should continue to let yourself be annoyed. The worst part is that the dev is right. That pain you feel makes the victory sweeter, but tackling that truth doesn't make the pain any lesser in the moment. So you're just left to fester in it. For perhaps a less sadistic example, we have The Witness. Here's a puzzle game where you spend the majority of your time with no idea what the game wants you to do. There's never any tutorial where it tells you what puzzles require what kinds of solutions. The only way to figure out how to play the video game is to figure out the answer so that you can reverse engineer the question, and then reapply that information when you see something similar down the line. It's very satisfying to break the code without any help, and when it clicks you get a huge rush. But it can be incredibly irksome when you're banging your head against what might as well be a puzzle in a foreign language. Good games shouldn't be needlessly vague. Good games shouldn't waste the player's time, and good games shouldn't have unfair surprises. But games also have more potential as a medium than just being fun and fair. Normally if a game had these lows it would ruin the highs, but since these games are so cheekily designed, lows aren't only made up for, but the highs are made higher as well. It's more rewarding to succeed since it's more difficult, and it's actually worth engaging with since the absurdity of the situations that arise are entertaining by themselves. The negative feedback is creating a more powerful positive feedback down the line. I've seen some games try and have a good bad level and fail just because they forget about that second half of the formula. A good example of a bad good bad level would be the hospital level from Hotline Miami. About halfway through your trail of destruction, your character ends up in a hospital and needs to escape. However, with such serious injuries, you have no way to shoot your way out, and you have to sneak around. Now, I don't know the dev's exact intentions around making this level, but from what I can tell, it appears that this moment of weakness is supposed to make your rampage of revenge even more rewarding later on. The problem is that you slip out of the hospital without anybody noticing, so you don't get to take out that rage on anybody until the next level, where you're back to normal. It would be more rewarding to find yourself drunkenly scraping together weapons out of trash you find lying around the hospital. Early on in the game, you can use some boiling water you find lying around to just utterly annihilate someone, so imagine what kind of fun improvised weapons you could find in a hospital. The sequence tried to be good-bad, but this level just kind of ended up being bad. It's probably awkward to intentionally put a purposely negative moment into your game, but I wish more devs would realize just how powerful these moments are when they work. To help prove this point, I'd like to take one final look at a traditionally good game using a good-bad moment, instead of just focusing on games that are operating under 10 levels of irony. There's this bit in Celeste during the summit Seaside where you have this long gauntlet of an obstacle course you need to navigate, so the game gives you this telescope to plan out your moves ahead of time. It's a real solid series of tough but fair challenges with no refuge in between. But since you get to preview the entire arena, you get to focus more on execution. You're never caught off guard. At least, not until the very end. After what has to be a solid half minute of airless platforming, you finally reach the end of the gauntlet and the game pulls a fast one on you. This wall, which up until now has been a bit of geometry, begins to shake and slowly falls off screen. Up until now, you've had all your movements planned out ahead of time, but suddenly the game forces you to play in the moment. By going against the rules of traditional game design, the devs create a sequence where the player experiences an extended period of sheer focus into a moment of ecstatic celebration, interrupted by a sudden high-stakes desperation back into a shaken sense of accomplishment. It's unlikely that the player will actually die to this trap. It's really slow, but the small extra pinch of negative feedback turns all the genuine bad vibes from the rough puzzle into a pretty rad experience. All of these games are emotional roller coasters. That's what makes them so great. Not only are they rewarding challenges to overcome, but they're also celebrations of your failures along the way. So the next time you're having a bad time in the game, ask yourself, is this badness just bad, or is it secretly good bad, prepping me for a good down the line?